Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
Will fund food stamps during the shutdown, at least some of them. Welcome to the Monday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, as the White House now says it will partially fund SNAP benefits after being compelled by 2 federal judges. We'll get the latest on this day 34 of the government shutdown from Tyler Kendall at the White House. We'll discuss with Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York, and we'll have insights from Bill Hoagland at the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington. Analysis from our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis are with us for the hour, and it's all after a look at Wall Street. Let's get up to date with the Monday trade. Charlie Pellet with us at World Headquarters in New York. Charlie, how's it look?
Thank you very much, Joe Mathieu, and it's looking mixed right now with the Dow lower, S&P, NASDAQ. They are both advancing. The start of a traditionally solid month on Wall Street sees tech stocks rallying. Amazon's $38 billion deal with OpenAI adding fuel to the AI trade. Right now, the S&P's up 19 at 68.59. That is a gain of about 0.3%. The Dow is down 195, drop there of 0.4%, while NASDAQ is up 172 for the NASDAQ Composite Index. Gain right now of 0.7%. NASDAQ 100 Index up 0.6, but the Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares down 0.4%. Our Mag 7 Index is up by 1.7%. The 10-year 4.10%, with a 2-year that's currently yielding 3.59%. Gold flat on the day right now at 4,006, little change there, while West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.5%, 61.26 a barrel, and Bitcoin now down 2.4%, 107,307 on Bitcoin. Amazon Web Services has signed a $38 billion deal to supply OpenAI with computing power, providing access to hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA graphics processing units. Amazon shares, they're up 4.8%. NVIDIA up by 4.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. Back we go. He's here in New York. Once again, your host, Joe Mathieu.
All right, Charlie, many thanks. Great to have Charlie Pellet in person. I don't have this experience often enough. We're here with all the famous people, indeed, at World Headquarters in New York, where we've got a little election that's going to take place tomorrow. And that's partly why we are here. Of course, we'll have special election coverage all day long and into the evening on Tuesday here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We put the whole band on the road, and we've got a lot more coming. This hour, we'll spend some time with Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York. He's got some thoughts on this mayoral race and, of course, on a government shutdown that has now hit day 34. You wouldn't know probably by looking at Wall Street. But there's no end in sight here. There is, however, an important development today that came from the White House announcing its intention as of noontime Eastern here. That was the deadline to at least partially fund SNAP benefits, food stamps that you've been hearing so much concern about. The SNAP program was defunded as of Saturday, knowing as well that Head Start was also on ice Saturday, and we saw the open enrollment for Obamacare begin over the weekend. This is partly why we have such an important week here. It's not just the shutdown. It's not only the election tomorrow, also in New York, New Jersey, Virginia. But on Wednesday, arguments before the Supreme Court over the president's use of emergency tariffs. We're not going to get a decision that day, but this will be landmark either way it goes. The president was asked about it on 60 Minutes last evening. Listen.
I think it's one of the biggest decisions in the history of the Supreme Court. I wanted to go so badly. I just don't want to do anything to deflect the importance of that decision. If we don't have tariffs, we don't have national security. And the rest of the world would laugh at us because they've used tariffs against us for years.
Clearly speaking on Air Force One there, and producer James did tell me that in advance. Cece, thank you. He was on 60 Minutes last evening and talked a lot more about this. The question, of course, is what happens if the Supreme Court says that these tariffs are not legal? Are you really going to pay everyone back? We've got a few things to catch up with Tyler Kendall on, of course, our Washington correspondent back from overseas. She was with the president in South Korea and back with us now in our Washington bureau. Tyler, it's great to see you. Let's start with the SNAP benefits, a pretty important development here in this government shutdown.
Right, exactly. Breaking news, as I know you were just coming to air in the 12 p.m. hour, Joe, the Department of Justice saying that it now has enough funding for 50% of food aid benefits through November. This is the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. About 1 in 8 Americans get aid through this program. The federal government, it costs them about $8 billion per month nationwide. They're saying 50%, so we're probably looking at a $4 billion worth of contingency funding here. And as you've been discussing on the program, this was compelled by a pair of federal judges that said that the administration had to look for some sort of solution with this contingency funding. But at this point, they're saying it's partially funded. It is unclear just how much recipients are going to receive and how quickly they will get that money. It looks like it might be replenished sometime later this week. Around Wednesday, the federal judge had said that he wanted an update. But at this point, we know that data shows us that many of these families ultimately use the majority of their benefits at the beginning of the month, and it is already delayed.
It's really interesting. Now, when we talk partial benefits, it doesn't sound like this is terribly sustainable. Do we know how long this contingency fund will have before it runs out?
At this point, this ruling only has to do with the month of November. So we're going to be looking if this government shutdown continues on, because, Joe, as you well know, this was one of those big pressure points that was on the table. November 1st, we kept talking about both for open enrollment, but also for SNAP. And that is now leading to other questions on what is going to compel lawmakers to ultimately get to the table and come up with a firm deal to reopen the government. Perhaps that will be November 21st, the next date that we have our eye on, of course, when this stopgap measure that the lawmakers keep voting on is supposed to go until. It looks like they're going to need a much longer date. Perhaps we'll see some sort of a resolution here where we're looking at a longer stopgap and maybe a package of funding bills. There seems to be some murmurs on Capitol Hill about a compromise there. But at this point, those talks are not involving leadership, to our awareness at least. It seems like these are bipartisan talks that are happening with rank and file members trying to get some sort of solution. But at this point, Republicans are holding the line. They're not going to negotiate on some of these key provisions, like those Affordable Care Act premium tax subsidies that are expiring, until the government reopens. Just
quickly, Tyler, while you're still with us, with regard to the Supreme Court arguments on Wednesday over the tariffs, you just heard the president who was talking to reporters on Air Force One. Was he planning to attend? Was that a late decision to not personally go to the arguments?
Well, I mean, it sounded like he was going to, though. In that Truth Social post last night, he did qualify that he's no longer going to. But this is a really core part of President Trump's economic agenda, right? And the question here are the legality around those tariffs that were invoked through IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. President Trump had to declare a national emergency in order to impose them. And those are the questions that I'm looking out for here. One, did President Trump have the legal authority to use IEEPA to impose tariffs? This has never been done before. Questions here about whether or not he bypassed Congress, but also whether or not the national emergencies he declared, as you'll recall, fentanyl on the border for those tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, and then the persistent trade imbalances for the so-called reciprocal tariffs. Do those meet the legal standard of being a national emergency? It has to be an extraordinary and unusual threat according to the law. So there's a lot at stake here, but Joe, as you well know, there are other options on the table, and officials haven't been shy that they're going to invoke other tariffs using other tools like Section 232 or Section 301.
Which is why Wall Street keeps saying, let us know when it's over. Tyler, thank you. Tyler Kendall, live in Washington. We want to get with Bill Hoagland. I was really glad to hear Bill was coming on today, because I actually think about Bill Hoagland with regard to this shutdown more than he might know. Bill is an operative, a former operative from Capitol Hill who was there when things were done differently, when there was something called regular order, when there was courtesy and decorum. And I'm not trying to date you here, Bill Hoagland, but a lot of folks miss those times in Washington as we prepare to set a record here for shutdown. He's senior vice president at the Bipartisan Policy Center. I'm just wondering where your head is before we get more specific. Have you ever considered a scenario like this before?
Well, not exactly like it is set up right now. Clearly, the longest shutdown I was involved in was in 95, 96 between the Clinton administration and a Republican Congress led by Speaker Gingrich and Senator Bob Dole as majority leader. at least during that shutdown, there was negotiations going on throughout between the leadership in the Congress and the President Clinton, to work out a deal. So this is a little different here, where we don't have the negotiations, and this is much different than the past.
Yeah.
Further, this is a president who has looked at Congress, I think, and said, Congress, you've failed to do your job. You haven't passed a budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Quite frankly, Congress hasn't done the budget over 13 of the last 25 years. They have not done their appropriation bills on time. And so the president probably correctly says, well, if you guys aren't going to get your work done, I'll do it for you. And this is this unitary president theory that exists is creating this, well, when Congress doesn't do its work, creates the vacuum and then sets this up. So this is much different than the previous shutdowns that I've been involved in over the many years.
Well, listen to that from Bill Hoagland. Next time somebody says it's not different. I want to ask you about the nuclear option, because the president keeps bringing it up, and I'm pretty sure as an institutionalist I know how you feel about this. Listen to President Trump from 60 Minutes on killing the filibuster. Here he is.
I think we should do the nuclear option. This is a totally different nuclear, by the way. It's called ending the filibuster. You know what? The Republicans have to get tougher. If we end the filibuster, we can do exactly what we want. We're not going to lose power. The theory is, oh, then we'll do it, but then when they get into power someday, they'll do it. That's true. But you know what?
So you think John
We're here right now. No, I like John Thune. I think he's terrific, but I disagree with him.
Boy, John Thune must have broken into a sweat when he heard that. Bill, this is a perennial argument around Washington. Nobody ever thinks it's really going to happen, but more folks suggest that the longer this shutdown goes on, that it could. Could John Thune be compelled to consider this?
Well, you mentioned, Joe, that I guess I would be considered an institutionalist going back a long way. And I don't think John Thune would be willing to consider this. Clearly, there's a reason why we have this mechanism that we have in terms of the filibuster. As I think you and I have discussed many times before, when our founding fathers set this system up, they set a system up of checks and balances. And that's not only checks and balances between the executive and the legislative, it's a checks and balance between the House and Senate. And it's that old story about how Jefferson wrote to Washington during when he was in Paris and asked, well, why do we have this House and not Senate? And the response coming from Washington was that in as you know, Tom, I guess he would have said, in Virginia, we drink hot tea, and we have a saucer, and the hot tea in the House is cooled by the saucer of the Senate. Yes, this is tough, but filibusters or 60 votes, supermajority votes are necessary to force compromise. And that's, well, we're not getting that compromise today. I still think it's important that we have that kind of a higher standard to pass major types of legislation. We have done away with the filibuster on a few items, particularly those as it relates to judges. Yeah. But on major legislative items, I think we still need to maintain the filibuster.
Donald Trump on Truth Social, terminate the filibuster, he writes, not just for the shutdown, but for everything else. We will get all of our common sense policies approved, in parentheses, voter ID, anyone, and make America great again. He goes on to write, Bill, remember, the Democrats will do it immediately as soon as they get the chance. Do you believe that?
No, I don't. I think it'd be, quite frankly, the opposite. If the Democrats would not want to have I think the Republicans would not want to have the Democrats do away with the filibuster, and so in that particular situation, the Republicans would stymie a filibuster. It's certainly a difficult issue, and certainly I can understand the president's position. We want to get things done, want to get it done quickly, but this is Congress. This is a slow, deliberative process. I'm sorry it takes time to get legislation done. But this is a big country and it requires a lot of deliberation, and it requires, at the end of the day, as Madison wrote in his Federalist Papers, compromise. We're going to get the panel's take on this in just a moment, Bill. Before you leave us, do you have any gut check on how long this might go, and when do they need to write a new CR? November 21st is in a couple of minutes. Certainly. I am of the mindset that if they were to open the government up, and my gut who knows? But my gut is that we have another payday coming up for civil service on Friday. We have military pay coming up. Taking some pressure off of the SNAP program today is helpful, but that's only partial, as was pointed out by Tyler here. It is you're going to continue to keep the pressure going here. We're going to have problems, continued problems with the FAA air traffic control officers, and so I do believe that the pressure will mount such that we get some sort of a agreement, maybe within the week or two here at the latest. That's my hope, and but who knows? This is a very uncertain time, and I've been told that there are there is negotiations going on, as Tyler had indicated. They are not with the with the leadership right now, but as soon as the president gets involved here, I do think we're going to be able to get this thing done and move on. But we'll probably have to pass another continuing resolution. Back in the spring, you and I talked about this, and I think the next continuing resolution will probably have to take us into early next year.
Bill Hoagland, great. I'm going to take your optimism and run with it, Bill. It's good to see you. Thank you. From the Bipartisan Policy Center in downtown Washington, D.C. Let's see how the panel feels. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us. Rick is our Republican strategist, partner at Stonecourt Capital, and Jeanne, our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. I don't know if you're feeling the optimism right now, Jeanne, as a Democrat. Both sides of the aisle seem to think they have the moral high ground. And I got on a plane yesterday. It took me a lot longer to get to New York than anybody ever could have imagined. We are starting to see different agencies feel impacts on different levels. The SNAP development today is an important one. Does it make you feel like we're getting closer to something?
Well, Joe, I'm feeling optimistic because I just listened to Bill talk about the Federalist Papers and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. It fills me with this so much positive feelings. I think another aspect of this is that what happens tomorrow at the polls. You were just talking about John Thune not being willing to take the nuclear option, as the president calls it. Well, if the polls don't look good tomorrow, the results don't look good for Republicans, they are maybe more likely both to stick to their guns on the nuclear option and also to start thinking amongst leadership about ending this thing. Because while Donald Trump is not on the ballot in the midterm, they are, and they know what tomorrow portends if the numbers don't look good for them. Rick,
I'm not sure if your mind has changed at all on this, but November 21st is coming up pretty quickly here. Even if Democrats, Republicans all got together, there was a big Oval Office meeting, everybody got along, kumbaya, wouldn't they need to write a different bill?
Yeah, I think, first of all, having Hoagland on, I mean, he's a Senate sage, right? I mean, like what you're getting there is really good information. And I think that's his point that he left us with is the current bill that came out of the House that has resulted in the House leaving town for 30 days is going to have to be redone. They're going to have to extend the CR and, as he said, probably into next year. And so there's a lot of work that's going to have to be done if and when you can get to a place where you have agreement on ending the end of the government period.
I'm curious to hear what Congressman Mike Lawler has to say about this coming up. Jeanne, in our remaining 30 seconds, is that the deal here? It's going to be a full year CR?
It very well may be. The time is running short now, so they may have to do that. And I trust Bill when he says that may be where we're headed.
Bill Hoagland, feeling the love. This is great. And our great panel as well. They're going to be back, by the way. We'll talk with Mike Lawler. The Republican from New York weighs in on the shutdown and on the election here in Manhattan. And then we'll have Rick and Jeanne back to unpack what we heard here. It's only Monday, if you can imagine. But of course, day 34 of the government shutdown. And by the time we get to Wednesday, we'll be picking through results and looking towards Supreme Court arguments on the president's tariffs. It's all ahead on the fastest show in politics. This is Bloomberg. Thanks for being with us on the Monday edition of Balance of Power. It's great to see you. We're live in New York, and we'll be here for a couple of days with election coverage in store tomorrow evening. Wednesday, as we've been talking about, will resolve back to Washington with arguments before the Supreme Court when it comes to tariffs. We're going to talk about the election here in Manhattan with Congressman Mike Lawler, along with, of course, the shutdown that is now 34 days old. And we got some really important news right as we came to air. The administration responding to the courts. Remember, 2 judges last week compelling the administration to fund at least part of SNAP benefits. And the White House says that it will do that, pledging to partially fund food stamps in the throes of this shutdown, knowing that a lot of states, and we've talked with a number of them, have been trying to take action on their own to bridge the gap here. It's unclear exactly how long that the White House will be able to keep this going. But an important point here on hopefully the road to reopening. And that's where we start our conversation with the gentleman from New York. Congressman Mike Lawler, Republican, is with us here on the eve of the elections. Congressman, it's good to have you back. Day 34. What does this mean for the state of New York, having at least some of these food stamps covered? And how long can the administration keep that going?
Well, assuming they're talking about depleting the emergency fund, that's roughly $6 billion, and food stamps for an entire month under SNAP benefits is over $9 billion. So, theoretically, this will extend benefits for a few weeks. But again, we shouldn't even be in this situation. This should have been resolved weeks ago. House Republicans passed the Clean CR back in the middle of September to keep the government funded and open and fully fund SNAP and WIC through November 21st so that we could actually negotiate over the final appropriations package, as well as other issues, including the ACA tax credits. But Democrats, led by Chuck Schumer, voted 14 times to defund SNAP, to defund WIC, to make sure that our military, our air traffic controllers, our Border Patrol agents were not getting paid. So while it's important that we make sure SNAP is funded and deplete the emergency fund, the fact is all of this could be resolved very simply if Senate Democrats would do their job, as they did 13 times under Joe Biden, and vote yes to fund the government.
Yeah, and we know where you're at on this, Congressman. I wonder, do you believe the polling when it comes to the blame game? Because this does seem to be informing some Democrats' decisions on this. The NBC polls, the most recent, 45% of Americans blame Republicans, 33% blame Democrats. Do you buy those numbers?
Well, this is what's fundamentally wrong. If you're governing by polls, if you're governing based on politics, this is why crap doesn't get done. The fundamental point here is that there's a very simple solution. The clean continuing resolution. Both parties have passed it over the years. There's no reason to shut the government down. All you're doing is creating hardship for the American people. You're using people that rely on benefits like SNAP and WIC. As Chuck Schumer said, quote, every day gets better for us. And as Catherine Clark said, this is about leverage. It's wrong. I don't care who's, quote unquote, winning based on the polls. The American people are losing because of the stupidity being played in Washington. Pass the Clean CR, fund the government, make sure programs like SNAP and WIC have the resources needed for the American people to put food on their tables. It's not a game.
We were
it's
just
absurd
talking
that this is what people are focused on, whether or not who's winning in the polls. Who cares? Well, that's not the issue.
We were just talking to the old Senate sage, Bill Hoagland, before you joined us. I don't know if you heard any of our conversation of the fact that the date on the CR could soon begin to be a challenge. Even if Democrats showed up tomorrow and said, hey, we're gonna do something different here, we're gonna start voting or talking, we'd be walking up against a potential shutdown again on November 21st. I know how many times you've made clear that Democrats have voted against this, but at a certain point, the timeline is going to be broken, right? Do we need to extend that, put a new date on it? What would be the process in changing that deadline?
Well, clearly, there's going to have to be an additional CR after the November 21st deadline. But in the immediate, they need to end this shutdown. So they need to vote yes on the CR that's been sitting in the Senate for over a month. And then we can focus on an extension, whether it's through the end of the year, whether it's into January of next year. I don't think there is support for a full year CR. I think there's a lot of issues that have to be addressed as part of the appropriations process. So I'm not in favor of a full year CR. I think most members are not in favor of a full year CR. We got to get to work, and we need to ensure that the government agencies are funded, that the workforce is being paid, that critical programs like SNAP and WIC are fully funded. Let's do our jobs, and that requires passing the Clean CR that's been sitting in the Senate for over a month. Then, obviously, we're going to need to pass an additional CR, date to be determined. But the objective should be to to finish the appropriations work before the end of the year.
I have to admit, I was surprised to hear Jason Smith, who chairs the Ways and Means Committee, tell us on the air that he supported a full year CR, which gives us a sense of how difficult appropriating has become. Congressman, I want to ask you about the mayoral race here in town. President Trump was asked about it on 60 Minutes. You probably heard what he said about Andrew Cuomo. Let's let everyone hear for the sake of our audience. Here's the president on CBS.
It's going to be hard for me as the president to give a lot of money to New York because if you have a communist running New York, all you're doing is wasting the money you're sending there. So I don't know that he's won, and I'm not a fan of Cuomo one way or the other, but if it's going to be between a bad Democrat and a communist, I'm going to pick the bad Democrat all the time, to be honest with you.
Where's your head on this, Congressman? If it is, as it appears, there's going to be a New York Mayor Mamdani. If that in fact happens, do you worry about federal funding for the city?
Well, it's interesting to see President Trump and Mike Bloomberg on the same page. I know Mike Bloomberg has supported and endorsed Andrew Cuomo. From my vantage point, it's a little bit of a bridge too far to endorse Andrew Cuomo for me. So many of the challenges facing New York, from cashless bail to sanctuary state policies to shutting down Indian Point and banning natural gas, were policies at his hands. But as the president said, when given a choice, and in this case, based on the polls, the choice is really between Mamdani and Cuomo. It's a choice between the lesser of two evils. As far as I'm concerned, an avowed socialist Marxist who talks about seizing the means of production, banning private property ownership, freezing the rent, raising taxes by $9 billion on New Yorkers. He wants to defund the police, legalize prostitution, shut down prisons, free busing, government-run grocery stores. These policies have never worked wherever they've been tried. Part of the reason why we have had so much immigration into the United States is because people are fleeing countries that promote these policies, whether it be in Eastern Europe or in South and Central America. They don't work. And yet here we are on the verge of electing an avowed socialist as mayor of New York City, the financial capital of the world. You will see a mass exodus out of New York. It's not just about federal dollars. The tax base will deplete because businesses and those who can afford to leave will. And that will be catastrophic for New York. It's part of the reason why yesterday when Kathy Hochul and Hakeem Jeffries were both asked, is Zohran Mamdani the future of the Democratic Party? They both stuttered and stammered and couldn't get out of there fast enough because they know this is a disaster for the Democratic Party to have an avowed socialist leading the charge in New York City. He will become the face of the Democratic Party. And it is not good for New York. As a lifelong New Yorker, this is a disaster. And it's part of the reason why, when people go to vote tomorrow, choose wisely, because this is going to be catastrophic.
With the lesser of two evils, Mike Lawler, the congressman from New York. It's good to see you, sir, and many thanks for being with us on Bloomberg. Indeed, Michael Bloomberg has endorsed Andrew Cuomo in the New York City mayoral race. He's donated to a super PAC supporting Cuomo. And Michael Bloomberg is the founder, majority owner of Bloomberg LP, the parent company of Bloomberg TV and Radio. Let's play it to the panel. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us. Bloomberg Politics contributors back with us throughout the hour here. Rick, of course, our Republican strategist, and I'll start there with you. Rick, we talked a little bit about the president's sort of tacit endorsement of Andrew Cuomo earlier today. Should Republicans have simply run a better candidate, or does that not matter in New York?
It always matters because the ability to get in and define what the terms of the election, what the stakes of the election are going to be, is really important. And I would say Curtis Sliwa has been a perennial mayor candidate. So I do think, what they'll probably look at is let's find some other way to make that point, because this has not gotten us very far. And look, right now in some of the polls, he's getting as many votes almost as Cuomo. So you never really know what impact you're going to have. You mentioned Mike Bloomberg got elected to mayor as a Republican the first time he ran. So never say never, but in this case, all eyes are on the Democratic Socialist, as Donald Trump calls him, the communist, Marxist has been mentioned by Congressman Lawler. I mean, like, this guy's got more titles than anything I've ever heard of. And yet, I think one thing everybody agrees upon, he's likely to have a new title, come tomorrow, and that's Mayor of New York.
Boy. Jeanne, I'm not sure what you made of our conversation there, but can Donald Trump get Andrew Cuomo elected mayor?
No, I don't think Donald Trump can get him elected. And I think the question you asked, Rick, about Sliwa is a really good one, because I think it can also be asked about moderate Democrats. And I often consider myself one in terms of their choice of candidate in terms of Cuomo. It's not that long ago that Cuomo stepped down as governor. He had, several issues dogging him at that point. He has tried to get over those, but it hasn't been a long time. And of course, you see the young people and the energy out for Mamdani. So I think there is that question about both sides of the aisle when it comes to New York City in terms of the party elite, if you will, the more moderate members. So I think that's a question that can be asked because, of course, we look at that Democratic primary and Mamdani beat Cuomo by a large margin, which is why he's running as an independent. Yeah. That said, this thing is not over. Polls show it's tightening. And you mentioned early turnout being huge. It is enormous. And lots of people over the age of 50. And those people may go with Cuomo. This may be a race of generations. And so Cuomo still has a shot here, although, again, the polls would have to be wildly wrong if Mamdani loses.
Hey, listen, this is why we came up here. This is the real stuff. And we're looking forward to our coverage tomorrow with the help of Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Thanks to both of you for weighing in here following our conversation with Congressman Mike Lawler. The mayor of London up next, only here on Bloomberg. We're at World Headquarters in New York, where we will be ensconced for the next couple of days with the New York City mayoral election taking place, the New Jersey gubernatorial across the river in Washington, very close, of course, to Virginia, where the gubernatorial election is taking place there. And we're going to have a late look at what's happening in California tomorrow with Prop 50. All this, of course, in the air on day 34 of a government shutdown. With news today from the administration, as we learned at the top of the program that we did, and we discussed this with Mike Lawler a short time ago, the administration will make good on at least partially funding SNAP benefits, having been compelled by 2 federal judges to do so. The big story we might not have spent enough time on is what happens in the Supreme Court on Wednesday. SCOTUS tariffs. The Supreme Court will hear the case that will decide the fate of President Trump's tariffs, at least for now, with regard to the emergency order that they are based on. The president calls it the most important case ever. He was asked about it on 60 Minutes, and Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall is in Washington with a bit more on this. Tyler, we've got 3 big stories here, a 3-ring circus involving the elections, the shutdown, which will be the longest in history tomorrow, and now, of course, the arguments, which the president, he says, will not be attending in person.
Right. This is an outsized week, I think it's fair to say, for politics, because all of these events that are happening are going to have long-term impacts, particularly as we look ahead to next year. And I think it's worth pointing out we are now 1 year away from the midterm elections. And we know that the economy and the real center point of President Trump's economic agenda, tariffs, is going to play a big role in that. Now, we're looking ahead to Wednesday. The Supreme Court did decide to hear this case on an unusually aggressive schedule, which signals to us that they may like to resolve this quickly, though we're not expecting there to be a ruling on Wednesday. But you hit it there. Really, at the heart of this is the bulk of the legal authority that the bulk of President Trump's tariffs are based off of. That's IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Keep in mind, no matter what happens to these tariffs, of course, it's going to have a big impact. But the administration has made very clear that they have these other tariff tools in their toolkit. Look at how they've opposed tariffs under Section 232, for example. Those are those sector-specific tariffs tied to national security concerns, or tariffs under Section 301. Those are looking into unfair trade practices. Actually, a lot of the tariffs that have been placed on China from the first Trump administration and carried over to today are Section 301 tariffs. So there's a lot of other ways that the administration could be looking at this, and that's really what we're going to watch for, how they may ramp up those other tariff tools to keep levies in place, because, Joe, officials have been very clear that these levies aren't going away.
Tyler, thank you so much. Bloomberg Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall in Washington, keeping tabs on a very busy week for us. And we'll be talking a lot more about that as we get closer to the arguments being heard on Wednesday. We have a special opportunity now to hear from the mayor of London, and my colleague David Gura, Bloomberg's David Gura, the host of the Big Take podcast, is in Rio de Janeiro at COP30 to bring us this conversation right now with Sadiq Khan. David, take it away.
Thank you very much, Joe. And I'm here with the chairman of C40 Cities, a group that's very active here in the early days of this COP30 summit. Let me start by asking about the role of mayors in this conversation. We in the U.S. know well that the president has expressed more than skepticism about climate change.
I hadn't noticed.
There you go. What's the role of mayors here, and how do you see this conversation evolving over the next 3 weeks?
Well, there's a huge amount of energy and dynamism and hope here in Rio, because this is also a gathering of C40, the World Mayor Summit's taking place in Rio. And we've got great stories to tell about how in cities across the globe, including some states in the USA, we've been tackling the climate emergency, creating great jobs, improving air quality, and showing that we are the doers at a time when many national leaders are the delayers and the deniers.
It's always a parlor game of how big a deal a COP30 is going to be. Set the expectations for us in terms of what we will get out of this at the end of it.
Well, I'm hoping that over the next 3 days, the energy, the dynamism, the optimism from mayors leads into from Rio to Belém. So the presidents and the prime ministers who are coming to Belém will see examples of success stories. Yeah, by the way, we don't just deliver, we win elections again and again and again. And that'll give them a sort of encouragement to go much further this year at COP. It's really important. Why? Across the globe, you're seeing heat waves, you're seeing wildfires, you're seeing flooding, you're seeing people concerned about the consequences of this emergency, not just in the global south, like yesteryear, but in the global north, in the USA, in the UK, across mainland Europe. And I think the public is demanding now much more of our national politicians.
Your message to the British government, UK government, was this can't be the Ed Miliband show. It can't just be the energy secretary talking about climate. It has to be something that the Labour Party, the government, takes up in earnest. What is your message to them in full about how they should be looking at this event and the role of climate change in their conversation, their policy conversations more broadly?
Well, I'm really pleased and proud. Unlike some countries, my national leader is here. And it's really important.
Keir Starmer will be here.
Keir Starmer will be here. The Prime Minister will be here. He does not think the climate change catastrophe is a scam. He does believe the science, really important, but also it's really important that he's here because it sends a message we take it seriously. What I want to do is turn this crisis into an opportunity, but also it's got to be a joint endeavour. It should be everyone in government. The new homes we need to build, they should be energy efficient. They should be built in a way that they are cooler in summer, warmer in winter, but also help with people's bills by being energy efficient. I want us to think about what is the future of work with AI, with automation, with factories closing down. I think there are jobs in terms of building the wind turbines, building the solar panels, building electric buses, building electric cars, installing the charging points. And that's why I think this is an opportunity. And look, these fossil fuels we've used to our benefit individually and as societies for 200 years, but it's caused real damage to the environment. There are alternatives now, whether it's solar, whether it's nuclear, whether it's wind. We should be invested in those.
I come from New York, where we're hearing an awful lot about London. It's being caricatured and stereotyped in the context of this mayoral race by the president, by one of the candidates for mayor as well. It's being portrayed as a place that's out of control, a lot of crime. There's a heavy amount of Islamophobia in there as well. What's your response to that, the way that London is being used as sort of something being held up in the New York mayoral campaign?
Well, first, I've got lots of friends who are in New York, and I think New York is the second greatest city in the world. Look, there's a reason why there are some people hate London and hate New York. There's a reason why they demonize London and now indeed New York. Why? Because we are progressive cities, we are liberal cities, we are multicultural cities, and we're incredibly successful. We are the antithesis of nativist, populist commentators and politicians. And I think, listen, the fact that in New York you may elect somebody who's a Muslim is neither here nor there. It's what are his policies? What are his vision? What does he want to do for the people of New York? And I think, listen, it says more about the people criticizing, Zohran Mamdani's ethnicity and faith. It says more about them, what they're all about than it says about him.
You spoke with him after the Democratic primary, and I wonder if you could kind of characterize what that conversation was like. You say it's neither here nor there that he could be the first Muslim mayor of New York, and I'll go with your hierarchy, London and New York, these two major cities. What did you tell him about what that is like? You were the first Muslim mayor of London, what that means.
Look, conversations I have with others are private conversations, but I'm quite clear. When you are from a city like London or New York, I think the greatest honour and the greatest privilege is to be the leader of that city. I've had many great jobs in my life that I've thoroughly enjoyed. There is no greater job than being the mayor of your city. I've seen from afar the campaign that Zohran Mamdani has run. He appears to be having fun. He appears to be connecting. He's doing something that I know a lot about, which is reaching parts of your city that are underserved, reaching people that hitherto feel as if politics isn't for you, understanding that actually sometimes cities aren't fair. Sometimes in a city you've got two separate tales taking place, and what's important is for you to be authentic. And whether you're in New York or London or other parts of the globe, is to be true to yourself. And I'm looking forward to seeing the results in the next couple of days, actually, see what happens.
With your mayoralty and perhaps there is an element of being the mayor of London or New York that is a global responsibility. You're here in Brazil. How much of that is a surprise to you, and how much do you think about the role of London on the global stage?
Well, the reality is when you are from a global city, when you're a leader of that global city, your audience, really importantly, are your constituents, but also it's the globe, because the world's eyes are on London, the world's eyes indeed are on New York. That is a huge privilege, but it comes with a huge responsibility. So I've never campaigned to be a Muslim mayor. I don't use those sort of words. I'm a mayor who happens to be Muslim, but I recognise, and this is just a fact of life, there are some people who may not have been a Muslim. There are some people who only see things in movies or when they hear from presidents. And I want to address some of the fears people have sometimes because I am a Muslim. I recognise sometimes people prejudge what it means to be a Muslim. So not by choice, but almost by duty, I sometimes use my role to explain we aren't the boogeyman. We are just like you. We've got the same ambitions and aspirations as you. I never asked for that responsibility, but I recognise as the leader of a great city, as a proud Brit, a proud Englishman, a proud Londoner, but also a proud Muslim, I'm more than happy to talk about my faith and what it means. And I'm sure you'll see if Zohran Mamdani does win, Mamdani doing the same. Not because he necessarily wants to, but because he recognises that our religion has been demonised. I think we both would recognise that actually a small minority of people who claim to follow our religion have done some bad stuff. That doesn't represent the more than 2 billion people on this planet who are Muslims.
Last question, kind of playing off of this. In New York, in this campaign, there's a lot of warning from a lot of wealthier New Yorkers saying that people will leave the city were he to win if the city were to get too progressive as they see it. We had Nigel Farage issuing the same warning in London today, that there's a chance that people who are of means in London might elect to lead if we go farther to the left there. Your response to that warning or that proposed trend?
Well, firstly, I've got no idea whether that is the case, whether that will happen. If that is the case, come to London. I'm going to roll out the red carpet and welcome you to London. I think the reality is, look, New York's a great city. I hope New York continues to flourish and thrive. Of course, like London, we have challenges, but the joy of being the mayor is you work with everyone across your city. I campaigned to be a mayor for all Londoners. Yes, I campaigned for those who live in deprived communities, those who desperately need social housing, those who are facing the consequences of cost of living crisis, but also recognising that I, as a politician, don't create the wealth. I don't create the jobs, but working with the private sector, working with all Londoners, you can do a great job.
Mayor Khan, thank you very much. The Sadiq Khan Joe joining me here in Rio de Janeiro at the COP30 conference. Back to you in New York.
All right, David, thank you so much. Bloomberg's David Gura, who will have many more interviews from COP30 over the coming days here as we balance a government shutdown back in the U.S. and, of course, elections, which bring us to New York. And we'll have much more on this on the late edition of Balance of Power. That starts at 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll be from New York as well tomorrow as the voting gets underway here in Manhattan. Of course, across the river in New Jersey and in Virginia, we're tracking 2 gubernatorial races, New York mayor and Prop 50 in California, which will probably be a Wednesday story because obviously West Coast time and things take a little while to be counted in California. Then we resolve to Wednesday with arguments before the Supreme Court. As we were discussing with Tyler Kendall, the president's entire tariff regime is on the line in a ruling that will, of course, come after Wednesday. This is just arguments this week, but could, in fact, muddy the waters when it comes to the tariff regime, what it means for our economy, what it means for our paying off debt. In some cases, the president has promised to do so with tariff cash, not to mention paying military paychecks. All of this could be tied to tariff money here and the shutdown taking place at once. Thanks for spending time with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Mathieu in New York. As I mentioned, we'll have a lot more coming up on the late edition of Balance of Power. That starts at 5 p.m. Right now, it's Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Tim and Carol are on their way in, and we'll have more on the markets coming up just moments from now from Charlie Pellet on what has been a pretty decent day so far. Mixed up, but the S&P 500 up 17. This is Bloomberg TV and radio.